Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one last time to step away from the entrance before you embarrass yourself. The rain fell softly across Park Avenue, turning the streets of Manhattan into ribbons of silver light beneath the towering glow of the Aurora Grand Hotel. Black SUVs lined the curb one after another while photographers shouted celebrity names into the cold night air. Men in tailored tuxedos climbed marble steps beside women wrapped in designer gowns and diamonds worth more than most people's homes. Tonight was the most exclusive charity gala in New York City, an invitation-only event attended by billionaires, tech founders, senators, and media executives. And standing alone at the bottom of the staircase was a black woman in a sleek black dress that carried no visible logo, no sparkling jewelry, and no entourage. Vanessa Cole stepped out of a yellow taxi instead of a limousine, and that alone was enough for Richard Whitmore to decide she did not belong there. The hotel manager adjusted the cuffs of his navy suit before walking directly into her path with the kind of smile that looked polite from far away but cruel up close. "Kitchen and service staff use the side entrance," he said, motioning toward the alley beside the hotel. Vanessa stared at him calmly. Her face didn't change. Around them, camera flashes continued exploding against the hotel windows while guests brushed past without noticing what had just happened. "Excuse me?" she asked quietly. Richard gave a short laugh. "You heard me." His eyes scanned her from head to toe again, lingering just long enough to make the insult unmistakable. "This entrance is reserved for gala guests." Vanessa glanced up at the massive gold letters above the ballroom entrance. Aurora Foundation Annual Legacy Gala. Her gala. Her event. Her money had paid for nearly every crystal chandelier hanging inside that building tonight. But Richard didn't know that. And somehow, standing there in the rain while strangers passed judgment with silent looks, Vanessa realized he had already decided exactly who she was the second she stepped out of that cab. A young couple walking nearby slowed down just enough to watch. One woman whispered something into her boyfriend's ear before smirking. Another guest pulled out his phone, pretending to check messages while recording the confrontation. Richard noticed the attention and straightened his posture even more. Authority looked good on him when he thought the crowd agreed with him. "Ma'am," he said louder this time, "I'm trying to help you avoid a scene." Vanessa slowly reached into her purse and pulled out a black envelope embossed with gold lettering. The official invitation. Richard barely glanced at it before shaking his head. Fake invitations have become a problem this year. He didn't even bother hiding the suspicion in his voice. Vanessa held the envelope between two fingers for another moment before lowering it again. "You didn't even read the name," she said. Richard folded his hands in front of him. "People like you always think confidence can replace credentials." The sentence landed harder than the rain. Not because it was loud, because it was practiced. Familiar, like something he had said before. Vanessa looked past him through the ballroom doors where wealthy guests laughed beneath cascading chandeliers while violin music drifted faintly into the street. Then she looked back at Richard. Calm, controlled, dangerous in a way he could not recognize yet. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here." Now, back to Vanessa. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully. I don't know what stunt you're trying to pull tonight, but this event is attended by some of the most powerful people in America. You are not getting through those doors." Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Are you absolutely certain about that?" For the first time, something in her tone unsettled him. Just for a second. But then another black SUV arrived. Photographers rushed forward, and Richard's confidence returned instantly. He raised his arm, physically blocking the staircase. "You are not entering this gala." And all around them, people stopped to watch. The silence, after Richard's words, felt heavier than the rain. For a brief moment, even the music drifting from inside the ballroom seemed distant compared to the tension building at the hotel entrance. Vanessa Cole remained completely still beneath the glowing canopy lights while droplets of water slid slowly down the sleeves of her black coat. Most people would have walked away by now. Most people would have argued. But Vanessa understood something Richard did not. The more comfortable someone became humiliating another person in public, the more they revealed about themselves. Richard glanced around and noticed more guests slowing down to watch the scene unfold. A young woman wearing a silver evening gown raised her phone higher, pretending to send a text while clearly recording every second. Two men near the valet station exchanged amused looks. Somewhere behind the glass doors, laughter echoed from the ballroom. Inside, the elite of New York City celebrated generosity and inclusion beneath crystal chandeliers, while outside, a black woman was being treated like an intruder at her own event. Richard took another step forward and lowered his voice. I am trying to handle this professionally. Vanessa looked at him carefully. Professionally, she repeated. You assumed I was staff before you even spoke to me. Richard forced a tight smile. You arrived in a taxi during a private luxury gala. People notice these things. Vanessa almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, she calmly held out the invitation again. Thick black paper. Gold embossed lettering. Her name engraved across the front. Richard barely glanced at it before pushing it gently back toward her. These replicas are getting more convincing every year. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. You still have not read the name. His expression hardened. Because I already know this invitation does not belong to you. The words landed loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. A couple walking past slowed immediately. One older man standing near the entrance frowned uncomfortably, but kept moving without saying anything. Nobody wanted conflict at a gala. Nobody wanted to interrupt luxury with reality. Vanessa noticed every face around her. The quick judgments. The avoidance. The curiosity. Some people looked embarrassed for her. Others looked entertained. But nobody stepped in. Richard turned slightly toward the security guard near the door and gave a subtle nod. The guard immediately straightened his posture and moved closer. Sir, the guard asked quietly, is there a problem? Richard never took his eyes off Vanessa. Just someone refusing to cooperate. Vanessa slowly crossed her arms. Interesting choice of words. Richard sighed dramatically like a man exhausted by inconvenience. Listen carefully. This gala includes senators, investors, professional athletes, and Fortune 500 executives. We cannot allow random individuals to wander inside because they found a copied invitation online. Vanessa tilted her head. Random individuals. That is correct. And how exactly did you determine I was random? Richard hesitated for half a second, but arrogance quickly filled the silence again. Experience. Vanessa let that answer hang in the cold air between them. Experience. Not evidence. Not verification. Just instinct sharpened by prejudice and protected by authority. A black SUV pulled up beside the curb, and photographers rushed toward it immediately. Camera flashes exploded across the wet sidewalk as a famous actor stepped out smiling. Richard instantly shifted personalities. His posture softened. His voice became warm and polished. Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Aurora Grand. The actor barely acknowledged him before disappearing inside. Then Richard turned back toward Vanessa, and the warmth vanished from his face like a switch had been flipped off. Now, he said coldly, I am asking you one final time to leave the entrance area before security escorts you off the property. Vanessa stared directly into his eyes. Calm, controlled, unshaken. You seem very confident for a man who has not asked a single real question tonight. Richard laughed quietly. I do not need to ask questions when the answer is standing right in front of me. Several people nearby reacted to that sentence immediately. One woman lowered her phone slowly, suddenly realizing this was no longer simple misunderstanding. This was judgment, open and undeniable. Vanessa looked toward the towering ballroom windows glowing gold above the street. Then back at Richard. You know, she said softly, the interesting thing about power is that it reveals people long before it destroys them. Richard frowned slightly, confused by her calmness. Most people became emotional under pressure. Vanessa became quieter, and somehow that made the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. Rain tapped softly against the black umbrella held by the doorman nearby, while the crowd around the entrance continued growing. Nobody realized they were about to witness the beginning of a disaster Richard Whitmore would never forget. The crowd near the entrance kept growing with every passing minute, but Vanessa Cole noticed something unsettling about the way people watched her. Nobody looked shocked anymore. The longer Richard Whitmore treated her like she did not belong there, the more normal it became to everyone standing around them. That was the real danger of humiliation in public. After a while, spectators stopped questioning it and started accepting it as truth. Rainwater shimmered across the black marble steps leading into the hotel, while luxury cars continued arriving beneath the massive golden awning. Every few seconds, another wealthy guest disappeared through the ballroom doors without interruption. No one asked them for identification. No one questioned whether they belonged. Richard folded his hands behind his back and spoke with the confidence of a man who believed the building itself supported his authority. "You are creating unnecessary attention," he said. Vanessa glanced toward the phones pointed in her direction. Several people were openly recording now. A man wearing a tuxedo whispered to his wife, while staring directly at Vanessa with open curiosity. "Attention was already here before I arrived," Vanessa replied calmly. Richard smiled thinly. "That sounds clever, but it does not change reality." Vanessa looked at him carefully. "And what reality would that be?" Richard stepped closer again, lowering his voice just enough to sound controlled while making sure nearby guests could still hear him. "People work hard their entire lives to enter rooms like this. They build reputations, connections, status. Then someone shows up pretending they belong because they found the right outfit and a copied invitation online." Vanessa's expression remained unreadable, but inside, she felt the shift. This was no longer about policy. Richard had stopped pretending it was procedure several minutes ago. Now he was speaking from belief, from assumption, from a certainty shaped long before tonight ever began. The security guard near the entrance adjusted the earpiece attached to his jacket while glancing nervously between them. Even he seemed uncomfortable now. But Richard continued anyway. "I have managed this hotel for 12 years, he said proudly. "I can tell immediately who belongs at events like this." Vanessa slowly nodded once. "That must save you a lot of time." The sarcasm slipped past him completely. Behind the glass ballroom doors, a string quartet played softly while waiters carried silver trays through crowds of laughing guests. Inside was elegance. Outside was exposure. The contrast made everything worse. A woman standing near the valet station suddenly spoke up carefully. "Maybe you should just check her invitation again." Richard turned toward her immediately, his smile returning for a split second. "Thank you for your concern, ma'am, but this situation is under control." Then he faced Vanessa again, and the warmth disappeared instantly. "I am done debating this." Vanessa looked at the woman who had spoken. Their eyes met briefly. The woman looked away first. That happened often when people realized prejudice was real in front of them. Sympathy without courage. Richard extended his arm toward the sidewalk. "Leave the property." Vanessa did not move. Not an inch. Something about her stillness was beginning to affect the atmosphere around them. Richard expected emotion, frustration, embarrassment. But Vanessa stood there with the composure of someone who already understood how this night would end. That confidence irritated him more than anger ever could. "Are you refusing a direct instruction from hotel management?" he asked sharply. Vanessa finally unfolded her arms. "I'm trying to understand something first." Richard exhaled impatiently. "What now?" "You keep talking about reputation," she said softly. "So I am curious how you think this looks." Richard laughed under his breath and gestured toward the crowd around them. "Looks like security doing its job." Vanessa glanced around slowly. Phones raised. Whispers spreading. Strangers studying her face as if searching for evidence to justify the humiliation they were witnessing. "No," she said quietly. "It looks like a man becoming very comfortable deciding who deserves dignity." The sentence hit harder than Richard expected. His jaw tightened slightly. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across his face. But then a younger employee hurried out through the revolving doors carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Whitmore," the employee whispered nervously. "The board members from Chicago just arrived early." Richard immediately straightened his jacket and adjusted his tie. "Good," he said. "The important guests are finally here." Vanessa watched him carefully after he said it. Important guests. The phrase lingered in the cold air between them. Richard turned back toward her one final time before stepping toward the arriving executives. "You should leave while you still have the chance to walk away with some dignity." Vanessa's eyes followed him as he moved toward the curb with polished confidence, completely unaware that every second he spent humiliating her was pulling him closer to a collapse he could no longer stop. Richard Whitmore moved toward the arriving executives with polished confidence, greeting each wealthy guest with the same practiced smile Vanessa had noticed all evening. The difference was impossible to ignore. For them, his voice carried warmth, respect, deference. For her, It carried suspicion before she had even spoken a full sentence. Vanessa stood alone near the bottom of the marble staircase while the rain softened into a thin mist across Park Avenue. The cold air brushed against her face, but she barely noticed anymore. Her attention stayed fixed on the entrance of the Aurora Grand Hotel and the people flowing through its doors. Billionaires, athletes, media personalities, venture capital firms. Most of them had spent months trying to secure invitations to tonight's gala. Some had donated millions just for a seat inside the ballroom. And not one of them knew the woman funding the entire evening was still standing outside. Vanessa slowly reached into her purse and removed her phone. The screen lit softly in her hand before she selected a contact near the top of her messages. Amelia Brooks, Chief of Staff. The call connected almost instantly. Vanessa? Amelia sounded relieved at first. Thank God. The board is asking where you are. We are supposed to begin the founder introduction in less than 20 minutes. Vanessa watched Richard laugh beside a wealthy real estate investor near the entrance. Delay everything. A pause followed immediately. What happened? Vanessa's eyes remained calm. I was denied entry. Silence. Heavy silence. Then Amelia spoke again, slower this time. Who denied you? Vanessa finally answered without emotion. The hotel manager. Across the street, headlights reflected across wet pavement while another limousine rolled toward the curb. Amelia lowered her voice carefully. Do you want me to contact hotel ownership? No. Security? No. Then what do you want me to do? Vanessa looked back toward the ballroom windows glowing gold above the city street. Through the glass, she could see hundreds of guests laughing beneath chandeliers funded by her foundation. A foundation she built from nothing after spending years walking into rooms where people assumed she did not belong. Do not stop him yet, Vanessa said quietly. Amelia sounded stunned. Vanessa, he publicly humiliated you. I know. Then why are we waiting? Vanessa's gaze shifted toward the growing crowd around the entrance. Several people were still recording. Others pretended not to stare while continuing to watch every second unfold. Richard had no idea how many witnesses surrounded him now. Because I want everyone to see exactly who he becomes when he thinks power protects him. Amelia went silent again. She understood Vanessa well enough to recognize that tone. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous. Not because Vanessa wanted revenge. Because she wanted truth exposed completely before consequences arrived. Richard suddenly glanced back toward Vanessa from across the entrance. Even from a distance, she could see irritation building on his face again. He was becoming frustrated that she still had not left. Most people backed down when embarrassed publicly. Vanessa remained exactly where she was. That unsettled him. The board members from Chicago just arrived, Amelia said carefully. A few of them have met you before. Vanessa nodded faintly even though Amelia could not see her. Then let us see how long this continues. Near the revolving doors, a young employee hurried toward Richard and whispered something in his ear. Richard immediately turned his head toward Vanessa again before answering sharply. The employee glanced nervously in her direction and quickly disappeared back inside. Vanessa could already tell what was happening. Questions had started. Quiet ones. Small inconsistencies beginning to surface beneath the surface of Richard's confidence. But arrogance always made people believe they had more time than they actually did. The master presentation is ready, Amelia continued softly. Your name is already programmed into the ballroom screens. Vanessa looked up toward the top floor windows where flashes of light reflected against the rain. Her name was probably glowing somewhere inside already. Yet outside, Richard Whitmore still saw her as someone attempting to sneak past security. Delay the presentation 10 more minutes, Vanessa said. Amelia hesitated. You are making him dig deeper. Exactly. Richard suddenly began walking back toward her with renewed determination, his polished shoes splashing lightly across the wet marble. Whatever patience he had left earlier was disappearing now. Vanessa ended the call slowly and slipped her phone back into her purse just as he stopped directly in front of her again. This time his expression carried less confidence and more annoyance. You are still here, he said coldly. Vanessa met his stare without blinking. So are you. Richard looked around at the growing audience nearby. Before lowering his voice, you are turning this into a spectacle. Vanessa gave the slightest nod toward the dozens of eyes already watching them. No, Richard, she said softly after reading the name stitched onto his lapel for the first time. You already did that yourself. For the first time all night, hearing his own name from her lips made something inside him tighten. Something changed in Richard Whitmore after Vanessa said his name. It was subtle at first, a brief tightening in his jaw, a flicker of uncertainty buried beneath the confidence he had worn all evening. Men like Richard depended on control, and control became fragile the moment they realized the person standing in front of them might understand the situation better than they did. But instead of stepping back, Richard doubled down. Pride almost always pushed people further once they sensed they were losing ground. The rain had nearly stopped now, leaving the streets glossy beneath the lights of Midtown Manhattan. More luxury vehicles rolled toward the entrance while photographers shouted over one another, trying to capture arriving celebrities before they disappeared into the ballroom. Yet despite the glamour surrounding the hotel, the energy near the staircase had become tense. Word was spreading quietly through the crowd. Guests who had entered minutes earlier were now lingering near the glass doors inside, pretending to socialize while secretly watching the confrontation continue outside. Vanessa noticed all of it. Richard noticed it too. That was why his voice became sharper. "I think we are finished here," he said firmly. Vanessa looked at him without expression. "You keep saying that." Richard ignored the comment and motioned toward the security guard again. "Escort her away from the entrance." The guard hesitated, just briefly, but Vanessa caught it immediately. Even he could feel something was off now. Richard noticed the hesitation too, and embarrassment flashed across his face for the first time that evening. "Did you not hear me?" he snapped quietly. "Sir," the guard answered carefully, "she has not actually caused any disturbance." Richard stared at him in disbelief. "The disturbance is her refusal to leave." Vanessa almost smiled again, but she stopped herself. Watching Richard lose patience revealed far more than anger ever could. "Interesting," she said softly. "So standing quietly is now considered disruptive." Richard turned back toward her immediately. "Do not twist my words." "I do not need to." The sentence landed harder than expected. Nearby, one of the younger employees standing near the revolving doors suddenly looked down at the floor to hide a reaction. Richard saw that too, and that made him even more determined to regain authority publicly. "You clearly enjoy attention," he said coldly. "No," Vanessa replied. "I simply stopped shrinking to make other people comfortable." For a second, silence settled between them again. Then Richard laughed under his breath, but there was frustration behind it now. "You know what your problem is?" Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Please, explain it to me." "You walked into a room above your station and expected people not to notice." Several people nearby exchanged uncomfortable looks immediately after he said it. Even among wealthy crowds, some statements carried too much truth to ignore. Vanessa held his stare without blinking. "Above my station," she repeated quietly. Richard folded his hands again, trying to recover his polished composure. "People earn access to places like this." Vanessa nodded slowly. "And what exactly do you think I failed to earn?" Richard opened his mouth, then stopped himself. He realized too late that the conversation had drifted into dangerous territory. But pride refused to let him retreat now. "I do not have time for philosophical debates," he said sharply. "My responsibility is protecting the reputation of this hotel." Vanessa looked up at the massive Aurora Grand sign glowing above them. "You keep mentioning reputation," she said softly. "Tell me something, Richard. How long have you worked here?" He straightened slightly, proud again. 12 years. 12 years protecting this place." "That is correct." Vanessa nodded once. "Then you should understand something very important." Richard frowned. "And what would that be?" Her voice remained calm, enough to unsettle him more than shouting ever could. "Buildings do not create reputation. People do." Before Richard could respond, another black SUV stopped near the curb. This time, 3 executives stepped out together wearing custom tuxedos and gold foundation pins attached to their jackets. One of them glanced briefly toward Vanessa while adjusting his coat. For half a second, confusion crossed his face. It happened so quickly Richard missed it completely. But Vanessa saw it. Recognition was getting closer now. The timeline was collapsing faster than Richard realized. One of the executives started walking toward the entrance, then slowed slightly as his eyes drifted back toward Vanessa again. Richard immediately stepped forward to greet the men before they could speak. "Welcome to the Aurora Grand, gentlemen." Vanessa watched carefully as Richard guided them inside with exaggerated politeness, unknowingly cutting off the very people who might have ended the situation instantly. Arrogance was doing exactly what she expected. It was isolating him from reality one decision at a time. Then, just before disappearing through the ballroom doors, one of the executives glanced back once more at Vanessa standing alone beneath the lights and suddenly stopped walking. The executive standing near the ballroom entrance stopped so suddenly that the two men walking beside him nearly bumped into his shoulder. Rainwater glistened across the marble beneath the hotel lights as he stared directly at Vanessa Cole from several yards away. Confusion crossed his face first, then recognition. Real recognition. The kind that instantly changes the atmosphere in a room before anyone even says a word. Richard Whitmore noticed the pause immediately and turned back toward the executives with his polished smile already prepared. "Gentlemen, your table is waiting inside." But the executive barely heard him. His eyes remained fixed on Vanessa. "Excuse me," he said slowly, stepping away from Richard. Vanessa watched him approach calmly while nearby guests shifted their attention toward the sudden change in energy. Even the security guard near the entrance straightened slightly, sensing something important had just happened. The executive stopped a few feet from Vanessa and looked genuinely stunned. "Miss Cole?" he asked carefully. Richard froze. The name landed harder than thunder in the middle of the crowded entrance. Vanessa gave a small polite nod. "Good evening, Daniel." Daniel Mercer, senior board member from Chicago, one of the largest investors connected to the Aurora Foundation. His expression darkened immediately as he looked between Vanessa and Richard. "Why are you standing out here?" Before Vanessa could answer, Richard stepped forward quickly. "Sir, there appears to have been some confusion regarding guest credentials." Daniel turned toward him slowly. "Confusion?" Richard forced a short professional laugh. "Yes, unfortunately we occasionally deal with unauthorized individuals attempting to gain access to private events." Daniel stared at him for a long second. "Unauthorized individuals." Richard nodded confidently, unaware that several people nearby had stopped breathing comfortably at this point. Vanessa remained completely silent. She wanted Richard to continue. That was the part he still did not understand. Daniel looked back toward Vanessa again. "Ms. Cole," he said carefully, "have you been waiting outside this entire time?" Vanessa answered without emotion. "Approximately 30 minutes." The silence that followed felt brutal. Richard's face lost color so subtly most people would not have noticed it. But Vanessa noticed everything. Daniel looked horrified now. "30 minutes?" he repeated. Richard stepped in again immediately. "Sir, with all due respect, we were following hotel security procedures." Daniel slowly turned toward him. "Do you have any idea who this woman is?" The question should have ended everything. Any reasonable person would have stopped talking right there. But arrogance rarely allows retreat once pride becomes involved publicly. Richard lifted his chin slightly. "I understand she claims to be connected to the event." Vanessa almost admired the confidence. Almost. Daniel blinked in disbelief. "Claims?" Richard nodded again, digging himself deeper with every sentence. "We have to protect the integrity of this hotel, especially during high-profile gatherings like tonight." Several nearby guests exchanged shocked looks. One woman quietly lowered her phone as realization spread across her face. The situation was shifting now. Fast. Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly like a man struggling to process what he was hearing. "Richard," he said carefully after reading the manager's name tag, "the entire reason this gala exists tonight is because of Vanessa Cole." The words spread through the crowd like electricity. People near the staircase immediately looked toward Vanessa differently. Not with curiosity anymore. With recognition. Some faces went pale. Others turned embarrassed. A younger employee near the revolving doors covered his mouth briefly as understanding hit him all at once. Richard stood perfectly still. I was not informed." Daniel interrupted him sharply. "You were not informed because you were supposed to treat guests with dignity before deciding whether they deserved respect." That sentence hit harder than anything else spoken all evening. Vanessa remained calm, but inside, she could feel the atmosphere changing completely now. The illusion of Richard's authority was beginning to crack in public. And once people sensed power shifting, they changed quickly. A hotel hostess hurried out through the revolving doors looking panicked. "Mr. Mercer," she whispered urgently, "they are about to begin the founder presentation." Daniel looked at Vanessa again with visible embarrassment. "Everyone inside is waiting for you." Through the ballroom windows, massive projection screens flickered softly against the walls. Vanessa could already see movement inside as staff prepared for the formal presentation. Her presentation. Her foundation. Her gala. Richard followed her gaze toward the ballroom for the first time with genuine confusion spreading across his face. Then slowly, almost painfully, realization began settling in. He looked back at Vanessa differently now. Not as an intruder, not as a problem, but as someone whose presence carried consequences far larger than he had imagined. Vanessa met his stare calmly. "Still think I do not belong here?" she asked. Quietly. Richard opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. Richard Whitmore stood frozen beneath the lights of the Aurora Grand Hotel, while the realization settled across his face piece by piece. Around him, conversations near the entrance faded into whispers. The atmosphere had shifted completely now. 30 minutes earlier, people watched Vanessa Cole with suspicion because Richard had given them permission to. But the moment Daniel Mercer spoke her name with respect, the crowd changed sides almost instantly. That was the strange thing about power. Most people did not recognize dignity until someone wealthy confirmed it first. Vanessa noticed the difference immediately in the way guests looked at her now. The same phones recording her humiliation moments ago were suddenly lowering in embarrassment. The same strangers who avoided eye contact were now pretending they had supported her all along. Richard swallowed hard and tried to recover what little control he still had left. "Ms. Cole," he began carefully, "if there has been some misunderstanding tonight, I assure you that was never my intention." Vanessa stared at him calmly. "You were very clear about your intentions." Daniel Mercer folded his arms beside her, his expression colder than before. "You told the founder of this gala she was above her station." Richard's face tightened immediately. "Sir, I did not know who she was." Vanessa finally stepped closer to him for the first time all evening. Not aggressively, just enough to force him to confront the full weight of what he had done. "That is the problem," she said softly. "You decided how to treat me before you knew anything at all." Richard opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Around them, the entrance had become painfully quiet. Even the valet attendants had stopped moving for a moment. The humiliation Richard created for Vanessa had reversed direction completely, and now he stood at the center of it. A hotel hostess hurried toward the group, carrying a tablet with visible panic in her eyes. "Mr. Mercer," she whispered, "the ballroom presentation is beginning in less than 5 minutes. They are asking where Ms. Cole is right now." Daniel looked toward Vanessa apologetically. "Everyone inside is waiting for you." Through the massive glass windows behind them, the ballroom glowed gold beneath towering crystal chandeliers. Hundreds of guests filled the room beyond the doors. On the giant projection screens near the stage, elegant graphics rotated slowly beside the words founder and chairwoman. Vanessa could already see her own name beginning to appear in soft white lettering across the screens. Richard followed her gaze, and his face lost even more color. Until that moment, some part of him still hoped this was exaggerated somehow. A misunderstanding that could be smoothed over quietly. But now reality stood directly in front of him in 20-foot letters glowing inside the ballroom. Vanessa Cole, founder and chairwoman. His breathing became shallow. I had no idea." Vanessa looked back at him. "No, you had an idea." Richard blinked in confusion. "Excuse me. You made assumptions the second I stepped out of that taxi." Her voice remained calm, which somehow made every word hit harder. "You assumed I was staff. Then you assumed my invitation was fake. Then you assumed I could not possibly belong in a room filled with wealthy people." Several nearby guests lowered their eyes uncomfortably because they remembered hearing every word themselves. Vanessa continued softly. "And the interesting part is, you never once asked who I was." Richard looked completely exposed now. The confidence he carried earlier had disappeared so thoroughly that he barely resembled the same man. Daniel shook his head slowly beside her. "Do you understand how catastrophic this is for the hotel?" Richard turned toward him immediately. "Please, let me fix this." Vanessa answered before Daniel could speak. "You already showed everyone who you are when you thought there would be no consequences." The sentence hit him like a final door closing. Inside the ballroom, applause suddenly erupted as the master of ceremonies walked onto the stage. The sound echoed faintly through the glass entrance behind them. Then came the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen." The voice echoed through hidden speakers near the entrance. Tonight would not exist without the extraordinary vision of one woman. Richard slowly turned toward the ballroom doors. A woman whose leadership transformed education access for thousands of young entrepreneurs across America. More applause thundered inside. Vanessa stood perfectly still while guests near the entrance began staring at her openly now. Not with suspicion anymore. With shock. Please join me in welcoming the founder of the Aurora Foundation, Ms. Vanessa Cole. At that exact moment, security radios near the entrance crackled loudly. Do not delay Ms. Cole any further. Repeat. Escort Ms. Cole inside immediately. Richard closed his eyes briefly as the full weight of the night finally collapsed onto him all at once. And Vanessa, after standing outside in the cold while strangers decided whether she deserved dignity, finally began walking toward the ballroom doors. The ballroom doors opened slowly as Vanessa Cole stepped forward, and the sound inside the Aurora Grand Hotel washed over the entrance like a wave. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the massive room in gold and white light, while hundreds of guests turned toward the entrance almost simultaneously. Conversations faded one table at a time as people noticed the woman finally walking inside. Moments earlier, she had stood outside in the cold while strangers questioned whether she belonged near the event at all. Now every eye in the ballroom followed her movement across the marble floor. Richard Whitmore remained near the entrance, unable to move. The same guests he had proudly welcomed all evening were now staring at him with open disbelief. Vanessa walked past him without anger and without triumph. That was what made it unbearable. She did not need revenge because the truth had already done the work for her. Daniel Mercer walked slightly behind her, while hotel staff rushed nervously to clear a path through the ballroom. Near the stage, the master of ceremonies stood frozen beside the microphone, uncertain whether to continue speaking or wait. Massive projection screens stretched across both sides of the ballroom, displaying elegant black and gold graphics beneath a single name in glowing white letters. Vanessa Cole, founder and chairwoman. The room erupted into applause the moment guests saw her enter. Not polite applause, standing applause. Chairs shifted backward across the ballroom floor as investors, executives, celebrities, and board members rose to their feet all at once. Vanessa continued walking calmly through the center aisle, while flashes from cameras reflected across the polished walls. Some guests smiled warmly. Others looked embarrassed after realizing they had witnessed part of the humiliation outside and said nothing. A woman seated near the front table quietly lowered her eyes as Vanessa passed by. Earlier that evening, she had recorded the confrontation on her phone. Now she could barely look at her. Near the ballroom entrance, Richard finally took a hesitant step forward. Ms. Cole, he called out carefully. Vanessa stopped walking but did not turn around immediately. The applause slowly faded into silence again as the room sensed unfinished business hanging in the air. Richard approached slowly, every movement stripped of the confidence he carried earlier. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Vanessa turned toward him at last. The ballroom remained completely silent now. Hundreds of people watching, listening, waiting. Richard swallowed hard beneath the pressure of the room. I made assumptions, he admitted, and I handled this situation poorly. Vanessa studied him calmly for several seconds before speaking. Poorly. The word hit him harder than if she had raised her voice. Richard lowered his eyes briefly. I was wrong. Vanessa nodded faintly. Yes, you were. No anger. No shouting. Just truth spoken plainly in front of everyone. Richard looked around at the ballroom, filled with people who had watched his authority collapse in real time. Please believe me when I say none of this was personal. Vanessa's expression remained unreadable. That is exactly what makes it dangerous. Richard looked confused. Vanessa stepped slightly closer, her voice still soft enough that people leaned forward to hear it. If it had been personal, then maybe it would have ended with me. But it was automatic for you. Immediate. You saw a black woman step out of a taxi and decided she could not possibly belong in this room. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody denied it. Because everyone knew she was telling the truth. Vanessa continued calmly. You did not check my invitation. You checked your assumptions. Richard's face tightened as the sentence settled across the ballroom. Somewhere near the back of the room, a glass clinked softly against a table before silence returned again. Vanessa looked around the ballroom slowly. Do you know the hardest part about moments like this? Richard said nothing. It is not the humiliation, she said quietly. It is realizing how many people are willing to watch it happen if the person being humiliated looks like they do not belong. The room felt smaller after that, heavier. Guests who had laughed earlier near the entrance now sat completely still beneath the chandeliers. Vanessa glanced once toward the massive screens displaying her name across the ballroom walls. Then she looked back at Richard one final time. "You did not deny me entry because of policy," she said softly. "You denied me because somewhere in your mind, dignity had conditions." Richard stood speechless beneath the lights while the entire ballroom absorbed every word. And for the first time all night, nobody saw him as the man in charge anymore. The ballroom remained silent long after Vanessa Cole finished speaking. Hundreds of powerful people sat beneath crystal chandeliers without touching their drinks, without checking their phones, without whispering to the person beside them. The silence carried weight now, not because a scandal had happened, because everyone inside the Aurora Grand Hotel had just been forced to confront something far more uncomfortable than embarrassment. They had witnessed how quickly dignity could disappear the moment someone decided another person did not belong. Richard Whitmore still stood near the center aisle, motionless beneath the golden lights. Just an hour earlier, he controlled the entrance to the most exclusive gala in Manhattan. Now he could barely hold eye contact with the room around him. Vanessa looked at him one final time before turning calmly toward the stage. She did not need to humiliate him further. The truth had already done that completely on its own. Daniel Mercer quietly stepped aside as Vanessa walked toward the microphone. Guests throughout the ballroom rose to their feet again, this time slower and more deliberate than before. The applause sounded different now, less celebratory, more reflective. Vanessa climbed the short staircase to the stage with the same calm composure she carried outside in the rain. Massive projection screens illuminated the ballroom walls behind her with photographs from the Aurora Foundation. Scholarships, small business grants, community programs. Thousands of lives changed through opportunities that once seemed impossible. Vanessa stood at the center of the stage and rested her hands lightly against the podium while the applause gradually faded away. Her black dress still carried tiny drops of rain that shimmered beneath the lights. Evidence of everything that had happened before she walked through those ballroom doors. She looked across the room slowly. Investors, politicians, media executives, athletes, celebrities, men and women who spent their lives speaking about equality in polished speeches and charitable campaigns. Tonight, many of them had stood only a few feet away from discrimination and chosen silence because confronting it felt inconvenient. Vanessa understood that better than any of them realized. "Thank you for being here tonight," she said softly. Her voice carried effortlessly through the ballroom. Calm, steady, unshaken. "I created the Aurora Foundation because I know what it feels like to walk into rooms where people have already decided who you are before you speak." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. "Sometimes those judgments are quiet," she continued. "A shorter conversation, a colder tone, a look that lasts a little too long. And sometimes," her eyes drifted briefly toward the ballroom entrance where Richard still stood frozen near the doors. "Sometimes those judgments become public." The room remained painfully still. Vanessa did not raise her voice. She did not sound angry. That was what made every sentence land harder. "People often believe discrimination has to look dramatic to be dangerous," she said. "But most of the time, it looks polished, professional, respectable." Several guests lowered their eyes again. Vanessa let the silence breathe before continuing. "The easiest way to reveal someone's character is to give them temporary authority over another human being." The sentence settled across the ballroom like stone. Richard slowly closed his eyes. Vanessa looked across the crowd one more time. "Tonight was never about whether I could enter this room," she said quietly. "I already own my place here. The real question was how many people would watch someone be denied dignity before deciding it was wrong." No applause followed immediately, just silence, honest silence, the kind that only appears when people recognize themselves somewhere inside the truth. Then slowly, one person began clapping near the front table. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom rose into a standing ovation so powerful it echoed through the chandeliers overhead. Vanessa stepped back from the podium slightly, not smiling, not celebrating, simply absorbing the moment with quiet grace. Near the entrance, Richard stared at the stage while Vanessa's name glowed across every screen surrounding the ballroom. founder and chairwoman. The same woman he had dismissed because she arrived in a taxi. The same woman he told to use the service entrance. The same woman he believed did not belong among wealthy people. And now, surrounded by the applause of the most powerful room in Manhattan, Vanessa Cole stood exactly where she had always belonged, while the man who judged her too quickly finally understood the cost of mistaking prejudice for authority.